Spoiler warning for The Mandalorian Season 3. Watch it and come back, or if you don't care about that, then just sit back and relax. The Mandalorian series came out at pretty much the perfect time, being both the flagship series to kickstart Disney Plus and as a saving grace for the past screw-ups the Star Wars franchise had been recently going through. The first season of the show was some of the best Star Wars content to come out in a fairly long time, and it was good television in general. Season 2 was a little more iffy. It wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, but there were a couple signs here and there that the writing wasn't as strong. Plus, with the amount of cameos from other Star Wars characters present, it was setting up a dangerous precedent for the future of the show, which brings us neatly to Season 3, which luckily didn't fall into those issues I was worrying about. But it instead created its own problems, so what the hell? The Mandalorian Season 3 feels like a step down from the previous two. Not so much to make it totally horrible or downright bad, but certainly enough to make the drop in quality very noticeable, which unfortunately is a trend I'm seeing Star Wars do once again, but instead of it being in films, it's now with the shows. But I'll get into talking about all that stuff soon enough, because I want to talk about the good stuff here first, because guess what? There's still enough good stuff here to be found. Season 3 dives way more into the lore and history of the Mandalorians, and I was all on board for that. We get to see what Mandalore looks like in the present, we get to see the rituals of the culture, and just see way more Mandalorians. Even seeing how there's different clans who operate differently, like always wearing helmets or not. I think fleshing them out was a good thing, and helping actually establish the planet of Mandalore in The Mandalorian was a good move, especially since the main focus of the season is about them taking back their homeworld and finally rebuilding their civilization. I also think that giving Bo-Katan a bigger role here was a welcome addition, since it's nice that she wasn't just tossed aside as perhaps a side character that we'd only see ever so often. And having the show focus on more Mandalorian characters is a good choice, because like I said, it helps flesh out the culture more. And in general, the characters were all pretty good. Din and Grogu still have a great relationship that we get to see even more of here and leads to some pretty wholesome moments. The side characters were also good, the Armorer did way more here than in previous seasons, Jon Favreau Mandalorian got a little more fleshed out here, which was nice to see. And a couple of old faces like this guy from those handful of episodes from before was pretty cool. Even beyond Mandalorians, it's nice seeing some more world building elsewhere, like getting to finally see Coruscant post Return of the Jedi, and seeing some of the new ways the New Republic is running things. Finally seeing an example of pirates that the Outer Rim has to deal with, getting a better idea of how Imperial remnants operate, and a little bit of their transition into the First Order. It's all good stuff. Luckily, compared to Boba Fett and Obi-Wan's shows, this one didn't get that cheap treatment, and it looks as good as ever, still being on par with the movies for how good it looks and perfectly blending CGI with practical effects. For the most part, there were a couple moments here and there that just didn't look good, but they all help make the experience that much better and aren't too bad to take away from the whole thing. The action in the show as well is still strong. Though there isn't as much of it as in previous seasons, I think that there are still plenty of moments that will get you pumped. Like the dogfights between Mando and those pirates was some pretty kick-ass stuff, and I mean, come on. Seeing large forces of Mandalorians taking on bad guys was what a lot of fans have been waiting to see for a long time, including myself.
Oh, this is beautiful.
Unfortunately though, with all the cool stuff we do see here, the show isn't able to handle all of it, and feels way too overloaded. The show bizarrely pulls a Book of Boba Fett and has almost an entire episode focus on a different character, which ties into a small side plot about cloning, which, I kid you not, doesn't come back until the finale. That plot point in this season is with Moff Gideon's cloning project, which has been teased since Season 1, but I would say has been haphazardly written here. The episode I mentioned takes place on Coruscant, with that scientist guy from the previous seasons dealing with not being utilized to his fullest scientific potential with the New Republic, and then trying to continue his research. That episode is really cool for showing us more stuff from the gap between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, but it relates to a small portion of the rest of the show and doesn't seem to mean that much in the end. And what makes that even funnier is that we don't even find out about those clones being Gideon's until the finale, and then they're disposed of in the same scene we find out about that information. It felt insanely rushed, especially for something like this being set up very early on in the show. It's a massive letdown. I at least thought that there would be more to it, like Gideon already having a batch ready and these were just the rest he was making, or just something that would have utilized them at least. Hell, Gideon's plan to use Mandalore as his base of operations and have the next generation of Mandalorians be Imperials was also underdeveloped in my opinion, since we don't actually get hints of this kind of stuff happening. Like, there should have been something in, like, episode 2 when Din and Bo go to Mandalore, but there's not. And none of this has helped at all with Gideon being absent for a majority of this season, and then just dying at the end. As overly used as it is for Star Wars to bring back characters who are supposed to be dead, I do hope they bring back Gideon, because I don't want for this show to have finally revealed the villain's plan after so long, only for it to not be used or mean anything at all, and especially for wasting Gus Fring in Star Wars like that. The show just doesn't really give you a good sense of that looming threat like the one you got in the previous seasons. It's all kinda just dumped on you in the end. So for Gideon's master plan to only be used in the finale and wasted, plus him getting KFC'd with not much screen time here, is extremely disappointing. Another subplot to have been wasted is with Bo-Katan and the Darksaber. Bo was a nice inclusion here. Like I said, it was smart for the show to use pre-established Mandalorian characters as other faces for the cast. But unfortunately, there's quite a few moments where it does kind of become her show more than Din's, the actual main character. And I have no problem with Bo getting more of a focus on this season, but when it comes at the detriment of either the story or main character, then there's an issue. An example of this is with the Darksaber, which Din rightfully won from Gideon in the Season 2 finale, and Bo was clearly not happy about that. Those feelings are then transferred over to Season 3, when we first see her again, and yeah, not everything looks great, but eventually the two make up and both settle on good terms with each other. So it was starting to seem like Din was going to become the next Mandalore or something, and Bo was going to be like his right-hand person or something, and it was looking really exciting. And
I return this blade to its rightful owner.
And it's gone.
What?
It's gone. It's all gone.
this just felt incredibly underwhelming. The show was kind of alluding to the fact that Mando and Bo were probably going to have to duel over the saber, and even in his episodes in the Book of Boba Fett, the armorer was teaching him how to wield it properly. So for all of that to be washed down the drain and mean nothing at all because of a damn technicality is really disappointing. And I again have no problem whatsoever with Bo-Katan getting the Darksaber. Hell, compared to Din, she's way more qualified to receive the thing, especially with the context of what she's gone through in both Clone Wars and Rebels. But from the perspective of viewers with or without this kind of context, it's very underwhelming for that hinted subplot to go nowhere and to be further wasted when the Darksaber is destroyed. Like, that was it? Really? Also, another weird subplot the show has is towards the beginning, when Din is getting ready to explore the surface of Mandalore to make sure it's safe to travel. So he wants to use the leftover remains of IG-11 to be his backup, since he was the only droid he trusted, but then can't after it turns out that it doesn't have any more functions besides killing, but it's rather impossible to get the necessary parts that the droid needs. Then the show drops that plot point when Din gets another droid instead, and only brings it back up for the finale when IG-11 is turned into a mecha for Grogu to use. But then it's barely used besides like 2 moments, and then it's easily destroyed. Only for Mando to apparently still have IG-11's remains, then find the correct part by chance, and then make him the new marshal for Carl Weathers' planet. And the whole time I was just wondering what the point of that whole thing was. Again, it was underutilized and used in ways that did not benefit the story. And this isn't even mentioning the weird side plots that didn't really fit the show, like the one taking place away from Mandalorian stuff that I already mentioned, but also the one where it's pretty much just a small Mandalorian group trying to save this one kid for the entire episode, or the one with Lizzo and Jack Black. I mean, that episode itself wasn't really that awful, and honestly I'd say it's halfway decent, but its placement as the episode before the penultimate one made no sense whatsoever and was tonally inconsistent compared to the rest. And these side plots that go nowhere is kind of my biggest gripe with this season. It felt aimless. There were so many things set up here that didn't mean jack in the end because the show couldn't focus on one thing at a time, on top of trying to tie in itself with other shows, like how there's clearly a little bit more setup here for that Ahsoka show, and to some extent that Rangers of the New Republic one as well. And before I forget, of course the Mandalorian tie-in with the Book of Boba Fett has come back to bite this show in the ass, because yeah, it was pretty jarring to see Mando and Grogu back together after they had an emotional separation in Season 2. Trying to MCUify the shows by having each of them be required viewing to understand either is utterly idiotic, and it's disappointing that that decision negatively impacts this one. I mean, look, overall the unfortunate thing is that The Mandalorian Season 3 just wasn't as strong as the previous two. There was too much meandering with the plot, which didn't fully kick in until around episode 5, and was still followed up with more random BS with Space Jack Black and Space Lizzo. This season wouldn't have been as frowned upon if it wasn't following up some of the best content in Star Wars and wasn't having to pick up the slack that Boba Fett and Obi-Wan left lying around. And since I mentioned those two shows yet again, I'll use this to act as a not so smooth transition to the part of the video where I'm going to mostly complain and voice my concerns with the current state of the Star Wars franchise. Star Wars has been in trouble ever since The Last Jedi. The franchise has been on this steady decline into mediocrity with how it's been mishandled. Every major project that has come out after that has been incomplete besides a couple, and let me put how bad that is into perspective. Josh Trank's Boba Fett film was scrapped and turned into a Disney Plus show. The work Lord and Miller did on Solo was reshot by Ron Howard. Colin Trevorrow's original Episode 9 script was rewritten by J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio. James Mangold attempted a Boba Fett movie as well, and again, it turned into a Disney Plus show. D&D got a trilogy, and that was swiftly cancelled. J.D. Dillard had an unannounced film, and was canned as well. Patty Jenkins was working on a Rogue Squadron film, which was recently shelved, alongside Kevin Feige's movie, which was also cancelled. And what we have to look forward to isn't really sounding that exciting at the moment. The Taika Waititi film was announced 2 years ago, and still has no updates. And with Thor Love and Thunder turning out the way it did, it doesn't exactly inspire that much confidence. I completely forgot Sean Levy's getting a movie as well, but that's not getting put into production until after Deadpool 3 and Stranger Things 5, so I'm willing to bet that we're probably not going to be seeing that in the next 5 years. Rian Johnson's trilogy has had literally nothing come out about it, and it's been pretty much nothing but back and forths on if it's been canned or not. The post-Episode 9 film isn't exactly what people want right now, and with Rey returning, there's already a lot of people who have been rubbed the wrong way. The point that I'm trying to make here is that Lucasfilm has been trying to push far too much stuff and not letting the people actually making the projects have enough time in order to make them as good as they possibly can. There's a reason people got sick of there being a film released every year, and why we haven't gotten one since 2019. It was just far too much. And unfortunately, I do believe with the incredible success of The Mandalorian, Disney, Lucasfilm, or whoever just wanted to push out as much product as possible without thinking about the quality of that product. And look, I enjoyed Season 7 of Clone Wars. I thought Star Wars Visions was an interesting idea for a series, and I thought Andor was the best piece of media to come out of Star Wars in a really long time. But the fact that there's been more mediocre to downright bad content being pushed out on us is not okay. I thought Lucasfilm learned that lesson after the backlash for Episode 9, but they're pretty much repeating that again with the shows, and it's so frustrating. I want Star Wars to be better. I want the franchise to experiment and try new things. And after seeing how good shows can be with stuff like Andor, I can't go back to accepting stuff like the Book of Boba Fett. And not everything needs to be like Andor, being serious and down to earth and all that. I still want my lightsaber fights and space battles, but I want it all to be written well enough to get me invested into what's going on, rather than just watching the explosions and gawk at it like a baby with jingly keys. But with my tangent out of the way, I can finish this review finally. The Mandalorian Season 3 isn't downright terrible, and I wouldn't even consider it bad. But compared to the quality of the previous seasons and the current state of Star Wars TV, it needed to be much better. It felt unfocused, undercooked, and overall rushed, which is pretty sad considering that this is the same series that saved Star Wars back in 2019. Hopefully shows like Ahsoka and The Acolyte can get things back on track. And I mean, other TV projects like Andor Season 2 and Vision Season 2 are very exciting to say the least. And eventually, when when Season 4 of Mando does happen, it can hopefully be much more coherent than this one. So with all that being said, it brings me no pleasure to say this, but The Mandalorian Season 3 gets a 6 out of 10.